understanding the 19th and 20th centuries. So liberalism again, which is an emphasis on individual rights that came right out of the Enlightenment and French Revolution, with terms like secularism, scientific progress, which came out of the Renaissance, religious toleration, all these kind of things. These are the buzzwords. They need to all be on your card from all of that. I would put everything here. Then the other thing is, again, if these liberal ideas are represented in these democratic documents. Again, favoring mass education. Fear of the mob. That comes from the sans-culotte period of the French Revolution, to leave out the working class. By the time we get to the end of the 1800s, our working class will gain the right to vote. Part of this will be the fear of the property classes, as working class people who are so poor begin to see socialism, communism as a viable option. And once you have a mass education, then the working class can have opportunities to break out of that class and work their way up. And the revolutions in Latin America will also spill out over in the 1820s because of the ideas that came out of the French Revolution and the Enlightenment before that, okay? And we will talk about the revolts of 1848. Very complicated, okay? But they're, in essence, you really need to know these isms, and that includes even some of the political isms, okay? Nationalism is going to be the potent force of the 19th and into the 20th century. It's one of the four causes of World War I. So we're going to be building on a run-up to those wars and what happens in Europe in the 1800s. Our liberalism did spawn nationalism because nationalists rejected hereditary rule and dynasties just as liberals did as well. And liberals favored, the idea of government by the will of the people. And what we see here is with our nationalists, they favor government by the will of the people, except that they see the will of the people embodied in their culture. And the major difference then between our nationalists favor culture, common culture, people who speak the same language and have the same culture, while our liberals they tended to see the world as it doesn't matter what nationality you are, everybody should have equal rights and there shouldn't be these differences. So they're going to break between that, and we'll see that come out during the revolts of 1848. So our nationalists will begin to move away from what the liberals want, and what the nationalists want are independent nations. Now, where are we talking about with regard to this? Huh?
Poland?
No, well, yes and no. What empire ruled over Poland? Russia. We're talking about the Russian Empire being made up of many, multitude of nationalities. What other two empires? What's the big one? Which one? Austrian and Ottoman. See, these are our Eastern European, Central Eastern European empires. They are filled with multiple nationalities. And they're going to be the ones that are biting, chomping at the bit, so to speak, to break away and establish their own countries. We will see this play out, but it won't happen until after World War I. And we'll see some things happening in the mid-later 1860s to 1870 in the German Confederation and the Italian city-states. Okay? All right, now, I am done with that one, and I'm going to start on the Industrial Revolution. So I sent to you the packet. That one is a very important packet, and it has a lot. I have a lot of little video clips also in this one that come from a series that's actually, well, you'll see when I show it to you. It's made up of, visits to certain kinds of industrial, British museums where they've recreated the Industrial Revolution and life as it was at this time period. So I have two big PowerPoints, though these have been embedded together in the one I sent you. So we're taking a break from the political things right now, and we're going to move into the real economic issues. And then we're going to come back and begin to talk about the impact of the Industrial Revolution on the politics of Europe in the 1800s and 20th century, 1900s. Okay, so we're going to have to start, though, with a revolution in agriculture. If there had not been a revolution in agriculture first, there would not have been an industrial revolution. And we use that word revolution, this is that one where, the ideal definition is a complete upheaval of existing systems. The Industrial Revolution will have an upheaval within economic and social, but not necessarily anything else. Okay, the Agriculture Revolution is kind of misusing of the word, but that's the way it's presented. This is a frontispiece. What again is a frontispiece? Yeah, it's the first page of a book telling you what it's about. This one happens to be about agriculture. Basically, it says it's being the mystery of husbandry discovered and laid open. Please understand now, we're getting to a whole series of vocabulary words in your textbook and such that you better know what they mean. Because things like, what's animal husbandry? Breeding. Yeah, it relates to the care and breeding of animals, okay? But if you're not familiar, when you see the word husbandry, you may think of it somewhere else.
Bestiality.
Okay, so what I need to do here is I need for you to understand why all of this starts in England. Because you all have the Industrial Revolution, and I should be able to kind of really roll through it, and it should spark memories of what you've already learned, and that's why chapter 21 should be a good grade for you as long as you read it thoroughly, since it's so long. But English Parliament, after 1688, and what is 1688 again? It's the Glorious Revolution, okay? When James II was kicked out under the ideas of John Locke, okay? But what Parliament will be dominated by the landowning classes. The landowning classes. And there's two, the landowning classes allied with the London merchants. Allied with the London merchants. Now let's divide our landowning classes into two groups. What are they? Yeah, let's do the first one, which is the older one. Aristocracy. Okay? They're on their way out now. Once we get into the later Industrial Revolution, the aristocracy is going to they lose their influence and power. It's going to be replaced by the middle classes and the working class. Okay, and then the other is the gentry. Okay, our non-titled group. From 1688 to 1632, the government was in the hands of these landowning classes, and they are going to govern with whose interest in mind? Their own. They are not of the people, by the people, and for the people. They are of the landowning classes, by the landowning classes, for the landowning classes. We can often refer to them as a squirearchy. And the word squire often in English is referred to as a landowner, a gentleman of England. Please understand now, as you are getting more history under your belt, that you should be able to understand the proper use of vocabulary. So when you see a gentleman of England, don't assume that he is someone that is of refined manners. Okay, he is polite and opens the doors for ladies, and what we might think of as the courtier. In this case, a gentleman of England is a landowner who's interested in improving his property and farming. Now, on the other hand, Our French aristocrats and gentry weren't as interested in this. That was because what were our French aristocrats interested in? What? Yeah, just even after the Revolution. But you see, this is 1688 to 1832. So they're interested more in the life of leisure and luxury and trying to gain enough wealth to maintain the life of leisure and luxury. Okay, they owned large estates, but they didn't really care how well they were managed, because that was just beneath them. Our English, on the other hand, aristocrats and gentry classes were very interested in the land itself. And we can see this even today, periodically, when you might see Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, out and about on his estates. He's often up to his knees in mud and boots. He's out there on the land. He has great interest in organic farming and land improvement. That's very English. Okay? That's very English. It's not French. Of course, our French aristocrats are no longer. Okay? So the result of this is going to basically be a transformation of agriculture, because these people will be, these men, these land-owning classes, are interested in improving agriculture. And that's why we have that frontispiece, okay, that obviously says who is going to be reading about English agriculture in the 17th century, titled Systema Agriculturae, being the mystery of husbandry discovered and laid open. Who's going to be reading that? The landowning classes, absolutely. Now, what we need to do is we need to talk about what came before, which some of you are still having problems with as I'm finishing grading the essay on the scientific, about astronomy. Many of you did not understand that essay was about astronomy. Okay? Having Francis Bacon and Descartes in there is not relevant. And some of you, what you did is you should have in the introduction, since it was about astronomy, mention the old astronomy, which was the geocentric theory. And I have people mentioning that's farther down the line. You've got to organize your thinking. So if there's an essay on the Industrial Revolution, what you need to make sure that you understand is what came before. And what came before was a traditional economy that was based on agriculture, farming. And it goes back to the Roman occupation of the British Isles. It was very labor intensive. And what we mean by labor intensive, we're talking about human capital, human labor, and not machines, because we don't have them yet. And throughout history, that goes all the way back to the ancient Mesopotamians and the ancient Egyptians. Labor was very intensive. Okay, you use every person available, and the majority of the people were farmers, first as serfs and then as farmers, with a very tiny aristocratic class that governed. Okay, the middle classes really don't begin to emerge until we get to the age of discovery. It's going to be, again, dominated by agriculture. All right, going all the way back. Now, what begins to change, albeit very slowly and not significantly enough until we get to this period at the end of the 17th century, is the influences of the Age of Exploration. Again, the Age of Exploration introduced us then to mercantilism as a more economic form. We're going to see that begin to end. It's going to be replaced once we get into the Industrial Revolution with laissez-faire capitalism. Mercantilism is heavily regulated, but you can make money. Okay? But what was it that the Age of Exploration did? What it did is it began to establish trade routes, overseas trade routes. Overseas trade routes, or an overseas trade system that stimulated demand for foreign products. And what were these initial foreign products that started off in the Age of Exploration? We know it was all about profit, but it'll bring in a demand for things like spices, Tea and coffee is going to come a little bit later, so let's wait with that one. That's really much later. Sugar is a big one, and cotton is a big one. The others are minor. Okay, so you know what? The common people aren't going to wear silk. Okay, yeah, that was brought in, but that was for the aristocratic classes. But once we have a trade system that's really set up, and we do open up to places like China and elsewhere, yeah, things like porcelain and stuff, but the real interest, the real dominant items that will provide a stimulus for demand will be sugar, cotton, and spices, all right, and that kind of things, till they become ordinary. Now, the traditional economy, though, that begins to, in which we are going to add to farming. Because farming is, if you didn't, remember in the Middle Ages, what did I say? If you didn't make it, you didn't grow it, you didn't have it. Now, after the High Middle Ages, by the time we get to 1200, 1300, and then 1400s, and such, when we begin to see our movement of Europeans and Portuguese around Africa, for the most part, we're really talking about farming dominating life. But, and remember in the High Middle Ages, what is it again what groups controlled producing goods? The guilds did, okay? The guilds controlled the production of what we would call goods, okay? Out in the fields, the farmers are farming, and that food is brought into the cities. But in the cities, where they're now beginning, as money increases, and during the High Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, producing goods. The guilds controlled it, and if you remember, the idea was to produce goods, but how did they look upon profit again? It was sinful, and that's going to take a little while to break out in the Renaissance as you go back and review that. It's one of the ways that our elite of the Renaissance began to patron artists and such, and explorers and such, as a way maybe to alleviate some of the sin, until eventually it becomes the norm. So if you are an entrepreneur, which is a French word that means what? We use it in English. A businessman, okay? And you want to get around the guild system some way. The way you did it was called the domestic system, or cottage system, or what was mentioned in, I think, chapter 10 or 11 in your book, the beginning of the year, putting out, okay, a system. And basically what this did, and it's represented in that little idealized cartoon, is you have a merchant or an entrepreneur, and he has the raw material. Now in this one it's cotton. It was probably in Britain what to start with? Sheep. Yeah, wool, okay, until we really get to the age of exploration. So, wool, and then cotton, which will be brought in, and that's one of the influences of the age of exploration, why you need to highlight that cotton, because it becomes a highly desired item, especially in the summertime when wearing of wool wasn't too comfortable. So the merchant makes a deal with a farmer, a couple of farmers in an area. And he says to these farmers, in your spare time I want you to take this wool and spin it into what? No.
Squares.
Thread. Spinning wool into thread. Okay? And then I'll come back, I'll pay you for the amount you did, and he's going to take that thread to other cottages in which he's made a deal for them to do what? Weave it into cloth, okay? So these are going to be done as supplemental income. So you can understand why this is important later on. Supplemental income, what we call piecework, P-I-E-C-E, piecework. It becomes really, for some of these farmers, the edge of survival, okay? Without it, survival would have been very difficult. Obviously, they have, as you know, because this is going to change in the Industrial Revolution, farmers work seasonally. okay? You all know what that means, that there are certain seasons, you have certain things you gotta do, you know, prepare the ground, plant the seeds, okay? Keep it weeded out, wait for it to grow. A lot of downtime, which I talked about at the very beginning, and then you go into the high intensity harvesting season. A lot of downtime in the winter. So they would be working in the evening hours by candlelight. Supplemental income. Okay, it's called domestic for the home or cottage for the little houses. So they would spin thread or weave textiles. The characteristics, though, of this was really what you really need to understand. Generally, spinning was women's work, and weaving will be men's work. We'll see that in the early part of the Industrial Revolution continue, but spinning was generally done by the women, weaving was done by the men, and children helped. They were, again, because these are low wages, they're paid, but they supplement agriculture, so wages were low. Some rural families found it much easier to focus on just doing this and give up the farming. Instead, they might have a garden for their basic food needs. Okay, so some would give up farming. One of the other characteristics, though, that you need to understand is that this allowed men and women to marry earlier. Having supplemental wages there. Generally, men couldn't marry until they had what? Land to support a wife and children. But now with supplemental wages, we're going to begin to see marriage earlier. This will also then contribute to population growth. So the importance of this is that's what I think is important. Population growth. Earlier marriages. So we're going to just see a few images here. You know, if you go back even to the ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians and anywhere in the world, you know, the making a cloth by hand. This is a hand loom where they would just by hand take the spindle with the thread on it and weave it through, clamp down on a piece of wood to tighten the threads together and go back again. What kind of power is helping him here? No, pedal power.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're going to see that. But again, and men doing that. Now, the other thing you need to understand is our traditional farming. It goes, you know, and it actually goes back to the Roman period. The Romans used a two-field system. They would farm half the land and leave half the land in fallow. What does fallow mean again? You're not planting anything there. Why?
So it gets all the nutrients back.
Yeah, you're letting the soil rest through rain and such. It can absorb nutrients, and then the next year you'll plant in the fallow field and let that. But you see that the Romans used a two-field system, primarily because they're coming from the Italian peninsula. This whole Mediterranean is, you know, is a climate like we have in Southern California. We call ours a Mediterranean climate. The summers are hot and dry, and the winters are supposed to be wet and mild, okay? But still, we don't get we could not live in Southern California if we had to depend on rainfall. We just couldn't do it. They couldn't support the population. So we get most of our rain from the snowfall, melt of the Sierras and from the Colorado River. All right, that's why they're concerned about the Sierras getting snow. But the thing here, even our Romans, with the Pennine Mountains there, they needed to bring water down to the plain areas, and so they built those famous aqueducts to carry water huge distances. And they were very good at it, and they did it in France as well. When they came up and took over Britain, then they came to a much wetter climate, much deeper soil. So they were able to go from a two-field system to a three-field system. And the two most important crops are going to be wheat for bread and barley for beer. Okay? It's used in other ways as well, but generally speaking. It was open field, and your farmers, who started off as serfs and then became peasant farmers, worked communally. They worked all together, even though the land they had was their own, or it was partly they had to work for the landowner. It's open field, meaning there was no fences, okay? Though they will begin very early in Britain, since that's what we're talking about here, to enclose certain lands, and some landowners would do that. And that's the British having their interest in the land. So, but they could leave as much, it could be a half the land it fell, depending on where it was. So you would have land in the form of strips in each of the 3 major fields that your village had, or that was around your emerging village or town in the High Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. So you had land there and there and there. You spent a lot of, it was a very inefficient system because it left a good part of the land. It was inefficient because a lot of the land was unused. And by the way, they did not keep very much livestock. Very limited livestock was kept. Why? They couldn't feed the livestock during the winter. And they're certainly not going to grow food for animals when they need it for themselves. They'll slaughter the animals, as we talked about, many of them, the pigs and such, before winter. They'll keep some in the homes with them to keep them warm, and a few of the other animals. But that's going to begin to change, okay? And from 1700 to 1800, the population basically doubles. And what this did is it put strain on the peasants, which then creates this cause and effect. This is the cause. The effect is going to be agricultural innovation. Okay? Agriculture innovations were necessary to squeeze more food out of the land because the population is growing. Plus we have the scientific revolution beginning in, medicine and that kind of thing, so it's going to ramp up. So it became a necessity, born of necessity. And a lot of what these agricultural innovations will be learned from connections between the Low Countries, the Dutch Republic, and England, because they already had a trade set up that goes back to, Elizabeth and, English wool sent over to the Low Countries. They were known for their high quality weaving. But what is it about the Low Countries that would help jumpstart agricultural innovations?
Levies.
Huh?
Say levies.
Yeah, the thing you need to understand, the Dutch were very good at reclaiming. They needed land too, but the only place they could reclaim it from was the sea. So they had very early on began innovate. They were very, very good at squeezing as much food out of the land as they could because they had limited land. And they were reclaiming land from the sea by building out dikes, sea walls. They would build these sea walls out, and then behind the sea wall would be ultimately water that would eventually fill in. I've seen this actually in the Netherlands, where they would plant a certain kind of grasses that did well in kind of salty water, and this would help build the land up. And eventually that land would be good for farming. That way, when if you have a chance to go to the Netherlands, and they're very westernized and they all speak English, it's not unusual to go driving down the highway and seeing a ship go by up high. And they have canals as well, but they're going to be at a higher level. Global warming, somebody said, problem for the Dutch? Not really, because they are on the cutting edge of keeping the ocean at bay. Venice should be sending people to study the Dutch innovations and keeping them. Now that's just, and let me explain why. obviously, the reason they're good at it is they've had numerous breaches of these seawalls that have inundated land going back to even the 1950s. And really, after the 1950s, they became the experts at keeping the ocean back. Okay? All right, we're going to watch something here. Part of the series we're going to be seeing connects us to the Industrial Revolution. So I'm more interested in what's coming up a little bit. This one, you're going to see some of this in more detail later on from this museum, textile factory here. They have people working it as if they were living, to mining, child labor in the mines, as we're seeing here, momentarily.
200 years ago, you could have been doing this for a living. If you had a younger brother or sister who were under 10, their job might have been to clean up in the spinning mill, climbing underneath the machinery, which was very dangerous. Or you may have worked in the fields with the rest of your family, picking up stone.
Clearing the fields of stones. Horrible lives to start with.
This first program examines how people at work were affected by the Industrial Revolution. What we see around us, the manufactured landscape, gives us clues not only to the secrets of the past, but also to understanding the position that Britain finds herself in today. Obviously, things have altered, and that's what makes history so fascinating. But despite change in the environment, there is always a thread of continuity, like here in Coalbrookdale. People have been making iron here for hundreds of years. All around us are aspects of the past, which enable us to piece together the jigsaw of our ancestors' lives.
All molten. And he's wearing goggles, the original people wouldn't have been. Sparks flying everywhere.
We'll be looking at the evidence that shows us how Britain became the first ever country to industrialize and the most powerful nation in the world during the 19th century, the workshop of the world. Before the Industrial Revolution, work for most people was on the land. Farming was labour-intensive and inefficient. Output was low, but generally speaking, there was enough food to sustain what was then quite a small population. Here at Acton Scott Rural Life Museum in Shropshire, they use a system of 4-course crop rotation. Each section is used for a different crop and is changed every year. This 4-course system gave farmers more fodder, such as turnips, than the previous 3-field system, so more animals could be reared.
By the way, the Dutch have the cleanest cows I've ever seen in the world.
Of course, there was more food for them. Farmers could experiment with different breeds of animals.
I know, they're so cute when they're little.
More animals meant more manure, which in turn meant more fertile soil.
There you go, they're picking through the manure for the seeds. Oh, jeez.
But none of these improvements could be really successful without enclosure. That is, the taking of open communal land into individual ownership. Sometimes enclosure was achieved by agreement, and today, here in Shropshire, we can see the unevenly shaped fields and crooked hedge lines as evidence of these voluntary enclosures. But where agreement couldn't be reached, there would be an inquiry and a special Act of Parliament to achieve enclosure. With these compulsory enclosures, you can see that the hedge lines are very much straighter. Thousands of these enclosure acts were passed to take open fields and common land into agricultural use, often for the first time.
Okay, this is where it's going to go on. Okay, so. want to give you a few names. So, you know, when you're doing your card on the agriculture revolution, you know, you might want, what you want to do is put down, you know, kind of define it, what came before, and then maybe we're going to have a couple of aristocratic landowners here who bring innovation. And one is a man named Jethro Tull, which is also the name of a rock group from the 70s.
Rock on.
Yeah. Not 1670s, 1970s. Okay, so look at the dates here. This is the run-up. Normally, what I'm going to tell you is that the Industrial Revolution, we're going to date it from about 1760 to 1760. That 100-year period marks the 1760 to 1860. 1760 to 1860. 1760 to 1860. So here in 1741, that's the death of Jethro Tull, but he invents the seed drill. And what the seed drill did here is it planted using a little machine. This is a little push machine. Okay, that could plant 3 rows of seeds. Poke a hole and drop a seed in. Now, how did they plant the seeds before this? Yeah, how by hand? Yeah, they might do that, or they would throw it and scatter it, which they would continue to do, especially in places like France, because they were slow to make changes. But these little machines here were much more efficient. And then he's going to come up with a new plow. Okay, a horse-drawn cultivator or a plow. It's basically a plow. And what this could do that the previous plows could not do is it could really get into that deep, thick soil that England had that the Roman Empire didn't. The plows that they used were more of a scratch plows. Okay, but this will really require some innovations in iron making and such that that they've talked about here. We're going to have all these overlapping connections. Okay, so what happens here, the results of this is twofold. Number one, we're going to have crop yields, more food. Okay, more food. Crop yields go up. What happens often if you scatter the seeds? Yeah, some of them just don't germinate. Okay, so this also reduces seed waste. Okay, then the second thing is you needed less labor, and that's critical because we need to set the scene for a worker labor force for the factories, and we're going to begin to see as a result of these changes, peasants really being forced off the land because they can't survive. So this image here, this visual here, is a visual that shows in the foreground a cultivator, Jethro Tull cultivator. This is actually in the Encyclopedia of Dennis Diderot. Okay, so here is the seed drill, here's the cultivator. Okay, so this becomes part of the landscape. Now, the other person we're going to mention is another aristocrat named Charles Townshend. So he's in that same time frame of the innovations in agriculture that take place in the beginning of the 1700s, so that by the time we get to 1760 to 1860, we're in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. So he's going to have a number of very important innovations. One is to replace the 3-field system with a 4-field system of crop rotation. While I call the other a field rotation, this is more of a crop rotation. He's going to get the nickname Turnip Townsend because he's going to introduce those big fat turnips as one of the fields that will be farmed. And these two here, by the way, we have our wheat and barley, our staples. I mean, they're growing other things as well. They'll have gardens with vegetables, and they'll have fruit trees and that. But the major food is bread. Barley. Put down next to this, these two here are called animal fodder. They use the term in there, F-O-D-D-E-R, which is basically feed for animals, okay? So, and those big fat turnips could be stored over the winter. They're not going to diminish, okay? And then you're gonna fill in your fourth field, so you're going to have more wheat with the leftover chaff part that you can feed to the animals, okay? Then he's also going to innovate with crushed limestone and clay that he's going to add to the soil as a kind of fertilizer. That's a fertilizer. Then, of course, with more animals, you have more animal fertilizer, okay? And that's, you get big piles of it, you know, your chickens go through. The effects of this is going to be more food, so I will never forget having, one time traveling in Africa, I was at we were watching wildlife, elephants coming down to a water hole, and we were in the blind, they couldn't see us. So the elephants would come in and watch us, and then they would leave behind their big deposits of poop, and they would move on their way. Then the baboons would come in a big group, and they would sit down around the poop piles and pick out the seeds and eat them. I'm thinking, okay, we're more related to them than we are to those chickens doing it, but yeah, okay, we can imagine. There are big, elephants are going to eat a lot. They eat about 400 pounds of vegetation a day. That's a lot of elephant poop, okay? And yeah, it's like a baboon smorgasbord. Okay, I'll pick up with, this is where I left with period 3, so this is where I'm going to start here.
So I guess they're really filled with shit.
Dude, literally, like, a half second after I wake you up.
I was awake.
No, like, no, but you stopped.
Oh, right. Oh, so I was like, I was trying to figure out what she was saying, because I was still kind of tired. I was like, what are you saying? Like, I heard it, and I was like, that made no sense. I just sat.
Machines are introduced. They can't be stored. They can't be located in the cottages. That is going to destroy their supplemental income. They're not going to be happy about it, as you're going to see here in a little bit later in what they do. But when we look here, what we see is these big warehouses now that that in the United States we call factories. In England they're called mills. But you've got a child working under there, very typical. We have families starting off together, but this is going to shift. This is a typical just water wheel. They knew about the water wheel, which they used to grind grain in, and that's why it will make an easy transition for power. This is the issue of the Industrial Revolution, lack of power, the search for power. As the more power they have, the more they can produce. Edmund Cartwright, his is the power loom. And this improves weaving, so he's on your list as well there. So now, when you have a water-powered loom, then what you can have is the equivalent of 200 hand looms. You can get rid of 200 families that are supplementing their wages. They're not going to be happy. The results of this are very significant. We're going to have more cloth at cheaper prices produced. We're going to be able to produce more cloth cheaper, as well as displace the domestic cottage workers, some of who had given up farming altogether to try and make a go of it by doing this all day and into the evening. Very typically in these mills, as you can see in the illustration, who are the main workers? Women and children. Highlight that and understand why. Why? Number one, you can pay lower wages. Number two, children were often used because the tasks were pretty simple. Simple tasks. And women had experience anyway with, making of clothing for homes in the traditional way, So we see these images that are very typical about these, that represents these machines. And we see it here as well. So they're working on, this is a power loom which is weaving wool into fabric. But cotton will be the highly desired product. And even as late as 1877, we're going to see these kind of power looms, though they're operating with steam power, or electricity, I should say. Now, listen, the problem is now you can make a lot of thread, and you can make a lot of cloth very rapidly. But what could they not get enough of? Cotton itself. And the problem with cotton was what? The seeds. Okay? So Eli Whitney, and by the way, don't put him on he has nothing to do with textiles. Okay? What is his little machine called? Cotton gin, from the cotton engine kind of thing that was hand operated. There's a couple of things about him. All right? With this cotton gin, that could take the seeds, the sticky little seeds, out of the cotton balls, that when they pick them off the top of the plant, it could ramp up to 55 pounds a day. Let me just say, without the cotton gin, slavery was limited in terms of size. Okay? Because you could plant as much cotton out there as you wanted. If you couldn't process it quick enough with the seeds, you would need so many more slaves to process so much more cotton that it would not be cost effective in terms of feeding the slaves. Slavery should have been on its way out. It was economically not feasible. But then what happens is the cotton gin comes in, and the profits were so enormous for the American South that they will cling to this outmoded system until it takes a civil war to end it. Okay? So the results here is we're going to ramp up cotton production in the American South. We'll ramp up cotton production in the American South, preserve slavery there. At the same time, what we're going to see is, right toward the end of his life, the British are beginning then to move toward the abolishing of slavery. But the Americans will hold on to it. All right, now, the other thing Eli Whitney is probably also as famous for, though most students just know him for his cotton gin, is the fact that he designed an assembly line to create what are called interchangeable parts for firearms, like rifles or handguns. Up until this point, these weapons of war were made, essentially, they were not identical, all right, because they're making the components individually. So if a part broke, it had to be custom made to fit that particular firearm. So it was more, now they're going to make identical parts. And if a piece breaks, you can just slip a replacement part in. This is a revolutionary part, and I would highlight interchangeable parts because that's going to become a part of the Industrial Revolution. So, this is what a cotton gin looks like. Again, you can see it takes a limited amount of slave labor to feed the cotton gin. What it does is it frees up slave labor to expand production, the planting and harvesting, and the plantations will grow much larger. Now, it's referred to as the factory system on page 2 of this handout. Again, you need to understand we have a transition in the factory system. What will be water-powered, water-driven machines will eventually be replaced by steam engines, but that's going to take a while, so you need to have the framework for this. Okay, so Arkwright's first water-driven mill, cotton mill, was in 1771. It's going to take a little while for them. First of all, we're going to see the steam engine. They didn't think about applying it to factories until after It was seen and improved in another way that we'll get to in a moment. So when you look on the back here, this one is golden for your notes here. A couple of factory acts are at the top there. A couple of that 1833 one is really an important one, and the 1844 one is an important one. You need to have a couple of these factory acts. And then I would also highlight them on your timetable of British reforms. And then the chart on the left has causes, then the factory system and effects, because again, history likes the causes and effects. So on the causes part of your chart, why don't you just highlight demand for cloth, highlight increased population, highlight new machines, and especially the water frame and the power loom. The water frame for spinning and the power loom for weaving. All right, and then later steam power. And then this is the factory system. Large numbers of workers. It's a division of labor. Another key word that we're going to see will fit with our assembly line, where a worker works on one part of the product. Machines, large quantities of identical goods, quicker and cheaper, buzzwords. Impact, decline of the domestic system, growth of the textile industry. All right, and then factory system will extend to other industries that we're going to see. So this is an image right here of children, child labor, simple tasks. What are they involved in doing? This is a matchstick factory. So they're boxing matches and carrying them. Here you can see women working in a, this is an engraving from Harper's Magazine. Oh no, that's not right. That's not right. This is 1851, a British textile mill, very typical. Large machines, noisy, dangerous. Okay, we're going to watch another one of the video clips here. So there's a couple things you want to probably get note-wise.
We think of factories as buildings full of machines, which enabled large numbers of goods to be made cheaply and efficiently. But in order to work properly, a factory needed a disciplined workforce. For the farm worker, the changing rhythm of the seasons dictated what he did day by day. But for the new factory workers, a more rigid and relentless discipline ruled their lives. Quarrybank Millet's style in Cheshire is typical of the early water-powered mills. Most mills like this were located in the countryside, next to good supplies of flowing water. We think of factories as built. Most mills like this were located in the countryside, next to good supplies of flowing water.
You'll notice that water will not be consistent. That's a problem that needs to be solved.
As there were few workers in the area, apprentices had to be brought in. They were orphans from the workhouses, and sometimes children as young as 5 years old were brought here to work. They travelled many miles to get here, and were then subjected to harsh factory discipline, dangerous conditions, and long working hours. So you can imagine how shocked they must have felt. This reenactment is giving local school children some idea of what conditions might have been like.
Problem is they're way too clean. And it's not harsh enough. They're trying to pretend to be harsh.
sorry, it wasn't anything. Got the fact book. They're spending all this money on this.
In coal mines too, but for different reasons, conditions of work were often crippling and degrading. Women and children worked long hours and were used like animals. This job is called hurrying.
Hurrying the clothes I've got on. The bald place upon my head is made by thrusting the coals. I hurry the coals a mile and more underground and back. I weigh 300 weight. I hurry 11 a day. The getters that I work for are naked, except for their caps. They beat me with their hands if I'm not quick enough. The boys take liberties with me sometimes, they pull me about. I'm the only girl in the pit. I'd rather work at the mill than at pit.
One of the people who lobbied for improved conditions in the mines was Lord Shaftesbury. He campaigned first for the passing of the 1833 Factory Act, in the teeth of opposition from many MPs. In 1842, the Mines Act was passed to stop women working underground, although they still worked on the surface. Also, young boys under 10 were prohibited from going underground, but the act was almost impossible to enforce. Christopher Culpin writes history books for schools, including Making Modern Britain. What influence did the Factory and Mines Acts have on the lives of ordinary people?
Well, of course, the 1833 Factory Act only really applied to children, and even for them, it was difficult to enforce. Only 4 inspectors were appointed for the whole country. The Inspector Rickards, who had responsibility for Yorkshire and Lancashire, for example, had over 2...
Okay, now, let me just say, even by 1830, so that you have a time frame, even by 1830, relatively few workers worked in the factories. Okay, relatively few of our working class were in the factories in 1830. All right, and you also need to understand that there will be a profound change in the factory system by the end of the 1800s. We're focusing right now on the start of it, mainly the use of water power, all right, and we're going to see migrations of people within England. 1830, therefore, to 1840 represents the early period of it. So that's a date you want to highlight. As you distinguish, you know, it says textile innovations. I don't have a card on this, but you know, I probably should have had a card just on the factory system in general. The easiest transition was to mechanize cotton mills. And by the way, I have it up here. Let me see if it. Yeah, a mill is an English term for a factory. Okay, when they use the word mill, it's a factory. Okay, so cotton mills are easier transition to mechanization because cotton was kind of a new thing. They had been hand weaving woolen textiles for a long time. That was more difficult to transition away from. So that's why textiles dealing with cotton paves the way to begin mechanization in industry. We have a population growth from 1750 to 1850. Basically, the population triples from 10 to 30 million. And the zenith period, if it's easier to remember 1750 to 1760, that's fine. But the real zenith period, where we have the most intense developments within this emerging industrial revolution, will be 1760 to 1860. After that, basically everything's in place. And what will be more interesting, though, as we'll see, is by the time the rest of Europe catches up, they're going to be able to take advantage of the newer technologies there, while Britain will already be obsolete in a lot of areas of it. So by 1820, another key thing, cotton textiles. Half of British exports are these mass-produced. That's it. What? Say it again. Of the textile industry. Yeah. No, 1830. No, 1830 to 1840. Okay. The zenith of the Industrial Revolution will precede it. Okay, they're beginning here because what's happening here are those initial machines that are on your factory, John Kay, all of those. That's really where it's really beginning to ramp up. But you see, by 1820, they had made this transition to the cotton mills, so that by 1820 on, it's going to be a huge part of their exports. Yes?
The exports are cotton or the
textiles. Yeah, cotton textiles. They're importing raw cotton. They are processing it into manufactured, cheap textiles. Okay, then that can be sold, and then they would make them, into clothing. People made their own, except if you were in the upper classes, where you would have dressmakers make your clothing for you. If you're the working class, you're buying the textiles and you're making it yourself. Now, they're referred to as the Luddites. And this was a social movement. And you should know this very well by now, that people don't roll over and just say, okay, take my livelihood away from me. I'll just starve to death. Okay, they fight back. And the Luddites were a social movement of textile workers who protested these mechanized looms. And they went in and destroyed them. Okay? Suppose, and this is, listen, by the time, it takes a little while for the people to realize, the working class, that their livelihoods are being changed. Especially our domestic workers who are supplemented income, and then those that gave up farming completely, they're totally out. So this movement then gained speed under a supposed, whether he existed or not, we don't know, but his name was referred to as Ned Ludd, and in 1811 they began, and we begin to see in the central part of England attacks on these machines, breaking into them at night and destroying the machines. Why he's wearing a dress, I don't know. Maybe it's his big disguise.
Maybe he's not actually a guy.
Now today, folks, they put bounties on the heads of these people. They put them on trial. They executed them. And we refer to this term today as a kind of industrial sabotage. And there are people out there today who use this term and refer to themselves as Luddites. They're basically an opposition to technology. And there are a lot more people out there than you may realize. A number of years ago, maybe 15 years ago, they arrested a man who ultimately was mailing bombs in little packages to businesses. Yes, and he ultimately was found out. They called him the Unabomber. And he would write these manifestos of anti-technology drafts after people were, a couple people were killed and maimed in this, and then, because they opened the packages up, and he anonymously wrote to newspapers, and that kind of thing, and you know, they refused to publish it, but it turned out that they did publish one of them with the hopes that someone might recognize it, and it turned out the Unabomber's brother recognized the writing and turned him in, and he's in prison today. Okay, because he was on, what?
Wasn't he technically using technology?
Yeah, he is. And do you know what? There are people out there that today are, and they're using technology in a way to try to end technology. You just think that it's the beginning
Skynet.
of the end of civilization. You know, and you know, I read in the paper that they developed a computer that can think. You know, and this brings me back to the Space Odyssey movie.
You mean Her?
Oh, that was a slow movie.
Oh, you mean Her?
Hey, dude, the movie is so old that when it came out, it was
The thing. Oh, what?
majorly. What do you think? Being in space is a whole lot of action. You watch too many Star Wars movies.
Gravity.
It has had an impact on your thinking. When that movie came out, I think I
to
was
be
in high
correct, I've
school
only
when
watched
it came out, and it was like, it blew people's minds.
You were a hot baby.
Well, now we have Her, the movie. We have the movie Her.
Yeah, well, I didn't tell her, that's what I didn't.
Samantha.
I hate it when my car talks to me out of the blue. Would like to run a vehicle report? Stop talking to me.
You can fall in love with your car.
Or when I first got this car, you know, I'm trying to get it to sync, you know, by telling it, you know, that
Turn
I wanted
right
it to
on
phone, and
Amar.
if it wouldn't do what I wanted, then I'm saying, stupid car. All right, here you can just see some illustrations of
If you curse at
sledgehammers
Siri.
taken to these wooden machines. Okay, and then this was called the Luddite Triangle. This was an area where the attacks were at the highest. And this is basically a wanted poster giving a bounty of 50 guineas and coins for anyone that turns in someone that breaks the frames, as they were called, these machines. Then we have the swing riots of 1830. And these were attacks on these new threshing machines. So what you had, you can see the horses down here are walking in a circle that's powering the machine. Then they can feed it in and thresh to separate the wheat seeds from the chaff, which had done by laborious hand. Remember the one scene where the two guys were hacking at the wheat? They were trying to break it up. And then once you get most of that seeds, you put it in a basket and you kind of throw it up in the air, and the breeze will take the chaff away and leave the heavier seeds. Very labor intensive. Now all of a sudden we've got these, but again, what it does is it displaces workers, okay? And so the swing riots were the destruction. Over 100 machines were destroyed in 1830. And this is really anger erupting at 50 years of change that the people just didn't understand. So the locations of the factories then are going to shift to the rivers, because that's where the power source was. And what we have then developing will be a division of labor and an assembly line, where when we talk about this is we're dividing the tasks into, you know, dividing the production into separate tasks. And as the video clip said, we now have a strict discipline. When people just farmed before the Industrial Revolution, they would work their butts off during the harvesting season, but there were down times in the winter time. So work was up and down in terms of how much effort you expend. Now all of a sudden it's constant, okay? It's constant and harsh discipline. Because you got children working in there, and if they're anything like my students that I have in some of my classes, you know, getting them to do anything is often difficult. But in those days they had corporal punishment, which did wonders. Okay? So, the real results here, what we're going to see, let me see what did I end up saying. Yeah, production, two things. Production increases along with the search for increased power. Production increases and there is a search for increased power. Okay, so let's talk now as we shift. These initial machines were made out of wood, but as the machines get bigger and the profits are there, and they move these to rivers where there's a bigger power source, they need a more durable material for building the machines. So we have to talk about the iron ore industry slightly bit, however exciting this is. Processing iron ore into, processing iron rock into a material that could be molded into everything from swords and weapons was done by hand. And we go back a long period. I mean, before the Iron Age, you had the Bronze Age, and bronze was a much softer substance, and iron was much more superior. But they're doing this, and we see right up here, they're basically breaking up the iron ore here. And they're ultimately going to be putting it into an oven to melt it down. In order to melt the iron ore down, to separate it from the rock, you've got to have a pretty high heat, and that's why they're using the bellows. But it's not going to produce enough iron that we'll see is necessary for an industrial revolution. Okay, it'll make, it'll make the needs for, this is what, people, the elite had the rifles, or the military had rifles, okay? Now, in order to fuel the fire, okay, they use charcoal to start with. To fuel the fire, to melt the iron into molten material, they use charcoal. But what's the problem? Use a lot of wood. And the problem is called deforestation. Okay?
Keep running, Forrest.
Here's the process, and I've seen parts of it in Africa. I've seen, Africans sell charcoal on the side of the road. Well, what are they doing? They're collecting wood from the forest, and they're burning it. But it has to be done in a certain way, so you don't take your wood and burn it up into ash. Okay, which happens if you have a wood-burning fireplace. You keep throwing your wood in there, it just keeps burning it up into, and then ash is what you left. So what they would do is they would stack the wood here, then cover it with a let the mud dry, and then there would be a hole, an opening in the top part. They would set it on fire, and within that confine, it would slowly burn. And then before it turns to ash, then they would stop the process. Then they would have their charcoal, which then they could feed into the furnaces to melt the iron ore from the rock. So what happens though is they've got they need more iron. So this whole system isn't going to work well because the earliest iron making used charcoal, which led to deforestation. So what they find is that around them, especially in certain parts of England and in Wales, is natural coal. All right? And the taking of the natural coal will be okay to start with. The problem is when they get the surface coal and they've got to start digging down deep, that creates other problems that have to be solved. So what they do then is they take this coal, my lumps of coal, they take the coal. Now there's impurities in the coal, and there's different kinds of coal, and you all know that coal, like petroleum, is an organic substance made up of the organisms of billions of little organisms that died. Okay, so what they do is they'll take the coal and they throw them into an open pit that's on fire. Then what they want to do is they want to burn the impurities off of the coal so that they're left with a more pure coal that they can use in the iron ore furnace. So what they do, it's called coked coal. Once you throw the coal into an open furnace, it burns off impurities. You're left with what's called coked coal, and that's what you want to use because it burns much hotter. So later they have what are called coking ovens. Okay, so what started off as kind of open air, must have been a horrible kind of place to work with the black soot blowing up. They're going to have an enclosed ovens, okay? And then what they do is they take that purified coal, they add crushed limestone, which is a rock, with the iron ore itself, and they put it in a huge blast furnace, and what it does is it melts then the iron. Then it's in a molten form, which then they pour into molds. So initially, they would have laid out in sand little depressions. And they call them pig beds because they look like little piglets nursing at the mom. Okay? They would pour them into these, and then they would be wooden molds. They would pour them into it. Then they solidify. Once they solidify, this pig iron, as it's known, is then transported for remelting in another place into molds for component parts for our machines, okay, that start off as our textile machines, because when you're seeing them in here, you can see that they're made out of metal. The place where originally is considered to be the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, as I'll say in the video clip here. The birthplace of the Industrial Revolution is a place called Colebrook Dale, and in 1709, the master iron maker, Abraham Darby, created these huge coking ovens. With the coking ovens, he was able then to mass produce larger amounts of iron. So we can call it the first coke-fired blast furnace. They would throw in with the coked coal they've already processed with the limestone and the iron ore. And since Britain was rich in iron ore, they'll have it in abundance. So coke burning, you can see here, the charcoal, coke burning was a response to the problem of deforestation. So these are all kind of blast, open air furnaces here to create the coked coal that they need to process iron. So Colebrook Dale in 1801 here, this is the quintessential picture in history books. You can see the blast furnace in the back. But the iron is still not suitable for large-scale machines, especially later on when we get into the 1840s and we begin the building of the rail line locomotives. So what they need to do is they need to process the iron for the impurities. Henry Court has a process of it's called a puddling process. If you really want to know how it works, Google it. So this puddling process took the pig iron that was laid out in molds and removed some of the impurities. So what it did is it's a kind of early steel. It's an early steel. So the puddling process, in which they would put it into this machine and this oven and heat it up. See, the problem was with pig iron, if you molded it into a component, and if that component got too hot and it had impurities in it, it would explode. So they're constantly looking at making iron stronger, okay, to withstand high temperatures. So what it did is it removed impurities from the iron. And it created what's called wrought iron, which was used to build bridges now, as we're going to see. Much stronger. But still not strong enough for what they ultimately need, which is pure steel. Okay? But what happens is, cause and effect. The iron production ramps up. And that has an impact also on ramping up coal production, which in turn contribute to the Industrial Revolution and more factories. Okay, so where we see the result of the public process, besides bridges, the Eiffel Tower. Now the Eiffel Tower, that was built as the 100-year commemoration of the French Revolution. So what year was it constructed? 1889. And then the Statue of Liberty, and then as well as now we're going to see with iron and then ultimately steel, we're going to see architecture be impacted as well, because buildings can go up higher. And that Bessemer process is probably the more important one for you, because this one by Henry Bessemer in 1856 is a turning point, because what he did is he made steel, kind of bypassing the wrought iron stage in the public process. He goes right to steel. And he did this by injecting air, blasts of air into the molten iron before it solidified, and it burned off the impurities, and it made a much stronger metal that we call steel. And steel is at the backbone of the Industrial Revolution. And it's really interesting, and one of the fears we have in this country is we no longer make steel in this country.
Oh, it's not bad. It's not bad. Because the facilities are now a lot more high-tech.
Yeah, they are, but they're not, and if you go to parts of the East, which they call the Rust Belt because of all the old factories in places like New Jersey and parts of New York, where you have abandoned steel factory production has gone to China. Okay? So the problem is in the United States, that where they're talking about, this could be a real major issue down the line. Okay? We need to produce steel, plus it is at a much higher, our steel making technology, if we applied it from the oldest, obsolete. Okay? So it was called, this converter, the Bessemer converter. So what we see then is coal, surface coal was pretty quickly depleted. So the only way really to get more coal is to go underground. So, but once they do that, the mines become also very important, and they're referred to as the pits. Where do you work? I work in the pits. And that's the term for the coal mines in England.
Oh, it means dogfighting pits for us.
It probably was like working. The problem, though, was that because it rains a lot in England, these shafts that they were beginning to extend underground would fill with water. So the water problem in shaft mining necessitated new innovations. And I'm going to tell you right now that the innovation that will solve the problem of water, so how to get water out of a shaft, and what's the energy power for the pump? It will be steam, and that's the first use of steam power. It's not going to be very efficient, as you'll see in the video. And then you're going to use child labor in the mines. Why? They're small, and these mine shafts were not very big. The lady there was recreating, working in the mines, and women will be taken out of the mines, very early on. It was just not a very safe place to be a female and working. But she said she had a bald spot on the top of her head because she was scraping her head on the top of the. And we're not talking about being able to stand, and that's going to be part of what I want you to understand. You can't stand up straight. All right. The child labor, because again, they paid them cheaper, and they could maneuver through the shafts easier because they were smaller. So these images here from the encyclopedia just show, they're going to lower them down in there. We see a few people working here and here and here. These mines, these pits were dangerous. They were dangerous due to using cave-ins, gases.
Ventilation.
This is this idea that you're carrying a little canary in a cage because they're very sensitive, and if your canary falls over dead, run. Don't walk, run.
In the book it talked about like a fireman who like exploded the gas. Oh yeah. What does that mean?
They were trying to explode the gas.
Yeah, like how did he not get hurt?
I don't know, but it's not a job I would like to have. Reach around the corner.
You get a bent stick.
So, but now, listen, now steam will be, once steam is harnessed to pump water out, then they're going to begin to see all their uses for steam power. And one of them is just to lower that tub right there with the workers. Okay, on the right, they're saying right here that they're screening for quality of coal. There's different quality of coal anyway. Okay, and so before these hoisting devices, miners had to often climb 600 feet up a ladder or down the ladder. That's your start and end of your workday. Okay, or it could have been lower down. That was probably the better way to do it, like this here.
Yellow squad.
This would have been steam. Here they're descending a shaft, and by this point the steam is and they're thinking this is this is great versus the other. But of course today OSHA wouldn't allow this to happen, So what do you notice here? Coal is being loaded onto cars. What's unique about the cars? What are they running on? Yeah, rail tracks. So somewhere along the line, and we're going to get to that tomorrow when I talk about the technology part. Okay, but see, this is what I want you to get here. These shafts were narrow, and this is why children worked in them. Now there's a couple of other impacts. If you're a young child, and these things weigh big time, weight, okay? If you're pulling and pushing this sort of thing here, and you can't stand up straight as you get older, you're going to become crippled. So we're going to have a huge number of crippled adults who became crippled working under such extreme conditions. Also, the other hazard, besides becoming crippled, and it's one of the reasons why they're going to pass these acts. Though, as they'll talk about it, they will not be enforced because they just don't have enough enforcement. All right, and the coal dust. See here, these are called putters or trolley boys. Okay. So the weight of the cart was anywhere from 200 to 650 pounds. And again, when you go down in a mine, it heats up a bit. So they were stripped down to basically nothing. So here we can see 1842 Coal Mine Act. Okay, I don't know if it's on here, it's not, but 1842, it outlawed child labor in the mines. But it will be systematically ignored, which I will ask you about in a minute. So you can see here the dangers of these girls just carrying coal up a ladder. This is called Capital and Labor. This was an early political cartoon on the exploitation of workers. Who sits at the top?
Aristocrats.
The owners of the factories and the mines. They're living the good life. Down below, you can see a crippled man here. You can see the poor. You can just see the devastated conditions of being crippled and that kind of thing. Now, we'll talk about Charles Dickens later because he's going to be one of our writers who exposes the horror of working. And if you read some of Charles Dickens' works like A Christmas Carol, it's filled with kind of freakish characters that would have been typical what he would have seen at this time period. Okay, this is actually people gathering outside a mine that had a severe explosion, and it said, you know, the deeper that mines went down, the more problems there were with poisonous gases and that kind of thing. So inadequate ventilation, part of the problem. Explosions were very common. Here is a typical family, a coal miner and his family, going from mine to mine, all right, and with the family, just searching for jobs.
Then children, as well as adults, found themselves doing up to 14 hours of work a day.
14 hours a day.
The coal industry was also hampered by inadequate power. Human power was used in these small pits to lower men, women and children down by rope. This horse-driven wind gin was later used to raise and lower a cage in the mine shaft. But the real restriction on coal output was the lack of pumps big enough to remove water from greater depths. This made deep mining impossible. The fact that existing power was pushed to its limits encouraged inventors like Thomas Newcomen and later James Watt to come up with fresh solutions to satisfy the constant need for power that industry has. The Newcomen engine, this is a life-size replica at the Black Country Museum, was the first successful attempt to harness steam power. It's a beam engine, and as you can see, it's very big. But by later standards, it was not very efficient, because it used many tons of coal to provide the heat to make the steam. Newcomen engines were widely used to drain mines, which made deeper mining possible. However, they could not be used to drive machines in factories, as that needed rotative power from a wheel that goes round and round. The Newcomen engine gave only an up and down motion. Better engines required perfectly bored cylinders and better pistons. The use of iron for steam engine cylinders was another step forward. At first they were made of brass, as in the engine we've just seen, but this was very expensive. Much of the early know-how in iron was developed here in Coalbrookdale. This is often called the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, because here in 1709, the ironmaster Abraham Darby first smelted iron using coke as a fuel instead of the traditional charcoal. This enabled iron to be made more cheaply and in much larger quantities. And throughout the 18th century, the Coalbrookdale Company was in the forefront of iron-making technology. They were to cast the world's first iron bridge, which was to become the symbol of Britain's Industrial Revolution. And even here, woodworking techniques were still in use to join together the pieces of the bridge. From the 1780s, it was James Watt's steam engine that gradually took over from the Newcomen type. With a separate condenser, the design was more efficient, giving greater power for lower running costs. Watt's engine was also designed to produce rotative power. This meant that it could be used to drive factory machines. New, larger factories could be built anywhere that there was a good supply of coal. This picture of Bradford shows the classic industrial landscape of factory chimneys, each over the boiler of a steam engine. This coal-burning, steam-powered industrial growth brought a huge increase in the demand for iron. The biggest iron production centre in the world in the early 19th century was Merthyr, which at that time was the largest town in Wales. When steam took over, the size of the operation became enormous.
Okay, so listen, with James Watt, we'll be revisiting him when I get into the next PowerPoint, because I'm going to be talking about the innovations in transportation that take off. So James Watt, that's in the 1780s. His rotative power, the up and down motion, the beam motion, which they used in the coal mines, was very efficient. In fact, they used more coal to feed that than they could get out of the mines. That didn't make it cost effective. But what increased production did is it reduced the cost. Okay, the more efficient power. Now, Manchester is going to be the case study as one of the most famous of cities of the Industrial Revolution. And Manchester, if you don't know where it is, yeah, Manchester United, they're famous for their soccer club. But Manchester's up here in the north and the north and the west. It's also called the Midlands or the Black Country, mainly called the Black Country because of all of the soot that was spewed into the air from the factories. Its port city is Liverpool, okay? And Liverpool is famous for? Huh? The Beatles. The Beatles.
There's pool.
So listen, this is where a lot of coal and iron was, so this is where people are going to move. So the population for Manchester was, in 1772, it was just 25,000. 1772 was 25,000. And then by 1850, it's over 300,000. So it goes from 25,000 to over 300,000 from 1772 to 1850. It will represent the best and the worst of the Industrial Revolution. The best and the worst of the Industrial Revolution. Now his name is Alexis de Tocqueville. I'll revisit him later. You want to highlight him. He's an important person for our knowledge about Manchester. He was a writer, French writer and traveler. And he would be a very reliable source for any descriptions he makes. And I'm going to give you a quote of his later. The problems of rapid urbanization is that these cities had no building codes and were not prepared for the influx of people. So the problems of rapid urbanization was housing, inadequate housing, disease, and that's because there's a lack of, as we're going to see here, sewage, sanitation, poor sanitation, crime. So the disease, the signature disease of the Industrial Revolution is cholera, and that's spelled cholera, C-H, cholera. And what causes cholera? And I'm going to talk more about it later. Water infected with fecal material. Okay. Pollution from the burning the soot. And the living conditions were cramped and crowded. As we're going to talk about in the video clip that we'll get. tomorrow. Cramped and crowded. People lived in what are called tenements, where one family would be lucky to have one room. There's no indoor plumbing. It's part of the problem in how cholera was spread. No, a whole family might have one small room. You would have a kind of dormitory living for workers, where they shared a bed. You rented a part of a bed. You slept with all your material possessions on you, because there were always pickpockets in the middle of the night, feeling through the clothing. Okay? Head to foot to make more room. Okay, so here's nice Manchester in 1750. Pleasant rural kind of landscape on the Earl River. Here it is. It was initially known as Cottonopolis. Cottonopolis. And Alexis de Tocqueville. Let me finish with him. What I want to do right now is pass the essays out. So can I get the first person to go get your folders? Hurry up real quick. Only one. I only have one essay.
Screwed up on that.
There's 2 essays I'm going to go over today. I'll be showing you the other essays and any questions you have. This essay is about astronomy.
Mine away.
On your folder, just go ahead and put down whatever the essay is.
Oh wait, we're
actually attempted to do push-ups yesterday.
Have you been keeping track of that?
Hey, I can tell right now, there's some of you that need to ramp up your study. And I think that in those 5 minutes that you're brainstorming, oops, you better stop and just read the prompt a gazillion times. Just